15 years ago, the nation was shocked to hear about this case. Rusty Yates returned home from work to a nightmare. His 5 children had been drowned in the bathtub by their own mother, his wife, Andrea Yates. Well, NBC's Janet Shamlian sat down with one of the few people who remains in contact with Andrea Yates as she lives out her days in a mental hospital.
It was a crime that horrified the nation in June of 2001, 15 years ago. Andrea Yates drowning her 5 children in the bathtub of her Houston area home. She then called 911 to report what she'd done.
You need an ambulance? No, I need a police officer. Yeah, send an ambulance.
Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and baby Mary, 7 years to just 6 months old. Her husband Rusty was working at the time. He returned to a scene of sheer terror.
Cops were crying. There was a lot of emotion there. They were the guys that had gone to that house and had to recover the bodies.
This morning, police found...
Phil Archer of NBC station KPRC was the first reporter on the scene.
They brought Andrea out, and her clothes were still wet, and her hair was still wet from the bathtub. And they brought her out, and she looked like a zombie. There was a sort of wildness in her eyes.
Even with a long and documented history of mental illness, including suicide attempts, she was charged and convicted of capital murder. But the verdict was later overturned, and in a subsequent trial, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She testified she believed her children's deaths would save their souls. Andrea Yates was committed to a Texas mental hospital where she remains today, now 52 years old.
You talk to Andrea on a weekly basis?
I'd say probably about every 7 or 8 days.
How is she doing?
She is, I think, doing remarkably well. She has excellent care.
George Parnham was and still is Andrea's attorney.
There's not a day that goes by where she doesn't care for, talk about, is happy about her children's lives before June the 20th, and grieves for her children.
Parnham says she spends her days making crafts, which are sold anonymously to benefit charity. And according to People magazine, she also spends time watching videos of her children.
The hospital where she is, there are no razor wires, there's no bars, there's no armed guards, no fences.
For the most part, it's a life of solitude. She never leaves the hospital and has few visitors. And while the case comes up for review yearly, Andrea has never sought to be released. Rusty Yates divorced Andrea 3 years after the incident. He later remarried and had another child, a son who's now 8. According to recent court documents, his second wife filed for divorce last year. In a 2015 interview with Oprah Winfrey, he spoke about his grieving and where his acceptance is now.
For some reason, when I think about them today, I think of them as being, teenagers.
Because he would be 20.
Or young adults.
Your oldest son would be 20 now.
It's really easy to get caught up in how they suffered or the fact that they're gone. And what I tried to do was say, look, I'm not going to let these events steal, that joy, the joy that we had for those 7 years.
I can name a worse situation than this, maybe with the exception of Sandy Hook. The added element here, of course, is that the children were killed by the one person that should have guaranteed their safety.
5 beautiful lives lost. 15 years later, a tragedy that still resonates. For Today, Janet Shamlian, NBC News, Houston.
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking that button down there and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.